The silence in the living room was heavy enough to choke on. My mother sat on the floral sofa, hands folded in forced piety, while my father stared at the carpet. I had come to share good news, but the atmosphere felt like a funeral. I waited for an explanation. Then she dropped it. My mom said, "You're too successful. It makes your brother feel bad." So I made him feel bad again by succeeding even more. She wanted me to fall by making false accusations about me to my boss, but it backfired. It all started right there. To understand why my promotion was an act of aggression, you have to know Nathan. My younger brother was the miracle child who could do no wrong. Growing up, my birthdays were practical affairs involving backpacks and graphing calculators. Nathan's birthdays were festivals of excess, featuring dirt bikes and gaming consoles. I learned early that my achievements were expected, while his bare minimum existence was celebrated. I focused on what I could control: my grades, my savings, and my escape plan. Nathan just stayed home, waiting for the world to hand him a trophy he never earned. The tipping point arrived 3 months ago at a mandatory family dinner. We sat around the oak table, picking at dry roast chicken. My Uncle Richard was there, a rare buffer against the usual toxicity. He turned to me and asked how work was going. It was an innocent question, but in this house, honesty is a trap. I told him about leading a major project that saved my company thousands. Richard was genuinely impressed, asking for details. For once, I let myself feel proud. I didn't see the storm gathering in my mother's eyes across the table. While I spoke, Nathan shrank into his chair like a deflated balloon. He was 25, unemployed, and subsisting on our parents' generosity while he claimed to be finding himself. Every time I mentioned a deadline or a bonus, he checked his phone, looking miserable. My parents noticed immediately. My dad shot me a sharp look, the kind usually reserved for talking with your mouth full. My mom stopped eating entirely. The air in the room shifted from boredom to hostility. I was simply answering a question, but they looked at me like I was kicking a puppy. After Uncle Richard left, the ambush began. My mom cornered me in the living room while Nathan hid in the kitchen. She had that serious, pained expression she always used when she wanted to manipulate me. She told me I needed to be more sensitive. She claimed my talk of raises and promotions was making Nathan feel inadequate about his own life. I stared at her, waiting for the punchline. She wasn't joking. She actually expected me to dim my light so her precious son wouldn't have to squint. It was absolutely absurd. I asked if she wanted me to lie about my job or pretend I worked at a gas station. She called me dramatic, but the subtext was clear. My success was a problem because it highlighted Nathan's failure. I refused to apologize for working hard while he played video games. I grabbed my coat and walked out, leaving her sputtering about humility. Driving home, the anger didn't fade. It crystallized into something cold. If my success was a weapon that hurt them, I wasn't going to disarm. I decided to sharpen it. I didn't just go back to work, I went to war. For 3 months, I became a machine fueled by spite. I took the high-profile accounts nobody else touched. While my peers left at 5, I stayed until the cleaning crew vacuumed around my desk. It wasn't about the money anymore. It was about creating a gap so wide between me and my brother that no parental coddling could bridge it. Every spreadsheet I conquered felt like a brick in a wall I built against them. The effort paid off faster than expected. My boss called me into his office on a Tuesday. I walked out 20 minutes later as the new finance manager. The title brought responsibility, but the victory was the salary. $112,000 a year. It was a staggering number for a 28-year-old. I sat in my car, staring at the offer letter. The ink was still wet, but all I could think about was how much this paper was going to sting them. I dialed my mother's number on the drive home. I told myself I wasn't looking for validation, but a small part of me still wanted to hear her say she was proud. That part died the moment she answered. I delivered the news with genuine excitement. The silence on the other end was deafening. She eventually muttered a flat congratulations, her tone suggesting I had confessed to a crime. She hung up before I could say goodbye. She treated my triumph like a personal insult. If the promotion was the spark, the car was the gasoline. My beat-up Mazda had served its purpose, but it didn't send a message. I drove to the dealership and leased a brand new Audi sedan. It was sleek, dark gray, and smelled like expensive leather and aggression. Signing the papers felt like loading a gun. I wasn't just upgrading my commute. I was buying a billboard for everything Nathan wasn't. As I drove off the lot, the engine purred with a smooth, vindictive power. The next family dinner loomed like a court date. I arrived on time, ensuring the sun was still up to catch the chrome. Nathan was smoking on the porch when I turned into the driveway. He froze, his cigarette burning to his fingers as he watched me park. The look on his face was a mix of confusion and naked envy. It was the reaction I had paid for. I stepped out, adjusted my jacket, and locked the car with a sharp chirp. Dinner was a masterclass in tension. We sat around the same table, but the power dynamic had shifted. Nobody asked about my job. Nobody mentioned the car, though its presence felt like a fifth person in the room. My parents focused on their food, refusing to meet my eyes. Nathan sulked, stabbing his potatoes with violent force. Their silence was supposed to punish me. Instead, it felt like victory. They were afraid to speak, because they knew I was finally untouchable. I didn't linger for dessert. The air inside the house was stale with unsaid accusations, so I made my escape. I was halfway to the Audi when the front door opened. My mother stepped out, hugging her cardigan against the evening chill. She didn't look like a parent saying goodbye. She looked like a warden chasing an inmate. I stopped with my hand on the door handle, the metal cold against my palm. I knew this wasn't going to be pleasant. "We need to talk," she said, her voice tight. She gestured at my car like it was a crime scene. She claimed I was rubbing my success in Nathan's face. She said, I knew he would see it and should have driven my old car. It was irrational. She wanted me to drive a broken vehicle just to spare my brother's feelings. The logic was so twisted it was almost impressive. She demanded I stop this charade immediately. I laughed, but there was no humor in it. The sound was sharp and jagged in the quiet driveway. I asked if she heard herself. I reminded her that while Nathan got tuition and rent, I lived in a studio that smelled like mold. I ate ramen for 3 years while he partied. I told her I earned every bolt in this car. She flinched as if I had slapped her. Truth was a foreign language in this house. You've become arrogant, she snapped, finding her footing. You aren't the person I raised. I shook my head, feeling the last thread of patience snap. I told her she didn't raise me. She watched me raise myself while she coddled Nathan. She looked at me with genuine disgust, as if my independence was a character flaw. She claimed my attitude was the real problem, not Nathan's lack of ambition. She was rewriting history in real time to fit her narrative. I didn't let her finish. I told her Nathan was going nowhere because she enabled him. He had no drive because he never needed it. I pointed at the house where my brother was hiding. I said, he was a failure by design, and that was her fault. Her face went pale in the moonlight. I had spoken the forbidden thing. I had pointed out the emperor had no clothes, and the emperor was her favorite son. I'm done apologizing for succeeding, I said. I opened the car door, the interior light flooding the driveway. It illuminated the shock on her face. She stood there, unable to process a world where I didn't submit. I told her if Nathan was uncomfortable, he should get a job. I slid into the driver's seat and slammed the door. The heavy thud felt like a gavel coming down. I was closing the case on my childhood role. I started the engine and backed out without looking at her. But as I shifted into drive, I caught a glimpse of her in the rearview mirror. She wasn't crying. She wasn't looking at the ground in defeat. She was staring right at my taillights, her arms crossed tight against her chest. Her expression wasn't sad, it was calculating. I thought I had won the argument, but the look in her eyes told me the war had just begun. 2 days passed in deceptive silence. I arrived at the office early, buried myself in spreadsheets, and tried to forget the look in my mother's eyes. The morning was productive, filled with the quiet hum of industry that usually calmed me. Then my boss, Glenn, appeared at my cubicle wall. He didn't have his usual relaxed smile or his coffee mug. He looked uncomfortable, shifting his weight from foot to foot. He asked me to come to his office and close the door. My stomach dropped instantly. I sat in the stiff leather chair opposite his desk, my heart hammering against my ribs. Glenn didn't waste time with small talk. He leaned back and told me he had received a very strange phone call yesterday afternoon. A woman claiming to be my mother had navigated the main switchboard to find him. She insisted on discussing serious concerns about my behavior. I felt the blood drain from my face. It was one thing to critique my car, it was another to invade my sanctuary. She claimed you've been stealing credit for work? Glenn said, reading from a yellow notepad. He wouldn't look me in the eye. The accusations were specific and vicious. She told him I was a fraud who manipulated data and harassed my coworkers. I sat there, paralyzed by the sheer insanity of it. These weren't just lies, they were career-ending allegations. She hadn't just called to complain. She had called to destroy my professional reputation. I felt sick, physically nauseous, as the betrayal sank in. I started to defend myself, but Glenn held up a hand. He told me he knew the claims were baseless because he reviewed all my output personally. He knew my team respected me. However, he warned me that she seemed determined to escalate things. If she wasn't heard, he suggested I handle the family situation before she contacted HR or the executives. He was supportive, but I could hear the warning in his tone. I was now a liability. My excellence was being overshadowed by my drama. I walked back to my desk like a zombie, ignoring the ringing of my desk phone. I grabbed my cell and marched out to my car for privacy. My hands shook as I dialed her number. She answered on the third ring, her voice sickeningly sweet. I asked her point blank if she called my boss. There was a pause, a hesitation that confirmed everything. Then she admitted it. She said she thought they should know the truth about how I really acted at work. I screamed that she was trying to get me fired. Her response was chillingly calm. She said I had become insufferable and needed to be knocked down a few pegs. In her mind, destroying my livelihood was a lesson in humility. She wasn't sorry. She felt justified in torpedoing my career because my success made Nathan feel small. She accused me of arrogance again, claiming she was doing me a favor. It was a level of sabotage I couldn't comprehend. She had weaponized her motherhood. I told her to never contact my workplace again. I told her we were done. She tried to interrupt, to play the victim, but I didn't let her. I hung up and threw the phone onto the passenger seat. I stared at the dashboard, breathing hard, realizing the magnitude of the breach. She hadn't just crossed a line, she had erased it. I thought I was dealing with a jealous parent, but I was actually dealing with an enemy. And enemies don't stop until you stop them. The weekend dragged by in a haze of paranoia and silence. I blocked my parents' numbers, but the lack of notifications felt heavy, like the pressure drop before a storm. On Sunday afternoon, Uncle Richard called me. He sounded tired, his usual jovial tone replaced by a grim warning. He told me my mother was spinning a narrative of victimhood to the extended family, claiming I had rejected her guidance. Dad was backing her up, and Nathan was telling cousins I was jealous. They weren't retreating, they were digging trenches. Monday morning arrived with a deceptive calm that shattered immediately. I walked into the office hoping for normalcy, but Glenn intercepted me before I even reached my desk. He didn't invite me into his office this time. He guided me there with a firm hand on my shoulder. His face was pale, his jaw set tight. He told me that our human resources director had received an email on Friday evening. It wasn't just a complaint. It was a formal accusation of corporate fraud. My mother had decided to burn everything down. Glenn slid a printed document across his mahogany desk. It was 3 pages long, single, spaced, and dense with vitriol. I stared at the familiar loopy handwriting of my mother, realizing she had scanned a handwritten letter to send digitally. She claimed I had falsified my quarterly reports and stolen credit for projects led by senior analysts. She accused me of bullying subordinates and manipulating executive leadership. The sheer effort she had invested in this fabrication was terrifying. She had spent hours crafting a manifesto designed solely to leave me destitute. The meeting with Lisa, the HR director, was scheduled for Tuesday morning. I walked into the conference room carrying a binder 3 inches thick. It contained every performance review, every project timestamp, and every email thread from the last 3 years. Lisa sat at the head of the glass table, her expression unreadable behind wire-rimmed glasses. The email lay between us like a loaded weapon. I felt a cold sweat prickling my neck, despite knowing I was innocent. In the corporate world, perception can often become reality. We went through the accusations line by line. For every lie my mother wrote, I produced a corresponding fact. She claimed I lied about the Delta project. I showed Lisa the sign, off sheet with my signature as lead. She claimed I harassed my team. I produced the glowing peer reviews from the last review cycle. It was a massacre of fiction by the sharp edge of data. Slowly, the tension in Lisa's shoulders released. She realized she wasn't dealing with a fraud, she was dealing with a family tragedy. Lisa closed the folder with a definitive snap that echoed in the quiet room. She looked at me with a mixture of professional assurance and personal pity. She confirmed that the investigation was closed and the claims were meritless. She explained that the company would send a formal response to my mother, stating that her claims were investigated and found false. She added that any further contact would be considered harassment and met with legal action. The corporation was now my shield against the woman who gave birth to me. I walked out of that conference room feeling lighter, yet entirely hollow. The company had validated my worth with objective proof, while my own mother had tried to liquidate it. The contrast was a physical ache in my chest. I sat in my car in the parking garage, the engine cold, and stared at the concrete wall. I had survived the professional assassination attempt, but the familial bond was a casualty. I pulled out my phone and navigated to my contact list. It was time to bury the dead. That evening, my phone buzzed with an unknown number. I hesitated, suspecting a trap, but curiosity won out. It was my father, calling from a neighbor's landline to bypass my block. His voice wasn't apologetic. It was wary and accusatory. He asked if I was happy, now that I had made my mother cry. He claimed she was just emotional, and I was taking things too far. I reminded him that she contacted HR. He ignored the facts, claiming family loyalty superseded reality. During dinner, he demanded I come over immediately to fix the mess I apparently created. I gripped the phone tight enough to whiten my knuckles. I told him that attempting to get me fired wasn't an emotional slip. It was a calculated attack. I asked if Nathan was enjoying the show, which made my father angrier. He said Nathan was suffering because the family was fractured. I laughed, a harsh sound in the kitchen. I told him the family was broken because they couldn't handle my success. I said I was done being the scapegoat for their insecurities. I didn't wait for his rebuttal. I hung up and blocked that number. The silence that followed was heavy, but necessary. I spent the next hour systematically dismantling every digital bridge they had to me. I blocked their email addresses, social media profiles, and the numbers of two aunts who always acted as flying monkeys. It felt like boarding up windows before a hurricane. I changed my locks the next day, just in case they still had a spare key. I installed a doorbell camera to monitor the perimeter. It was extreme, but after the HR incident, I knew there were no boundaries they wouldn't cross to hurt me. 3 weeks passed with blissful, eerie quiet. My work performance rebounded as the anxiety of imminent sabotage faded. Glenn stopped looking at me with pity and started treating me like a manager again. I began to sleep through the night without grinding my teeth. I almost convinced myself it was over, that they had accepted the new reality. Then, the letter arrived. It was a thick, cream-colored envelope sitting innocently in my mailbox. My mother's distinctive, looping handwriting scrawled across the front turned my stomach instantly. I carried it inside like it was hazardous waste. I debated burning it unopened. But the morbid curiosity was too strong. I needed to know the depths of their delusion. I slit the envelope open and unfolded 5 pages of single-spaced text. It was a masterpiece of manipulation. She detailed how much she had sacrificed for me and how ungrateful I had become. Nowhere in those 5 densely written pages did she mention calling my boss. Nowhere did she apologize for the lies she sent to HR. It was pure gaslighting. The final paragraph was the insult that eclipsed the injury. After 4 pages of victimhood, she offered a conditional truce. She wrote that if I apologized for my overreaction and promised to be more considerate of Nathan's feelings, we could move past this unfortunate incident. She wanted me to beg for forgiveness for surviving her assassination attempt. I read it twice, sure I had misunderstood. I hadn't. She truly believed she was the benevolent matriarch, offering a wayward son a path to redemption. The sheer scale of her narcissism was actually breathtaking. I didn't feel the rage I expected. Instead, I felt a cold, clinical clarity. I took high-resolution photos of the pages and texted them to Uncle Richard with a simple caption. "You seeing this?" He called me 5 minutes later, sounding winded. He asked if she was serious. I told him she was deadly serious about her delusion. Richard read the demand for an apology aloud and actually laughed. He said it was the most disconnected thing he had ever read. Hearing him validate the insanity broke the last lingering thread of guilt. Richard told me to stick to my guns, confirming I owed them absolutely nothing. I thanked him and walked to the kitchen trash can. I didn't shred the letter. I didn't burn it in a ceremonial fire. I just dropped it on top of coffee grounds and eggshells. It belonged with the garbage. It wasn't a sacred text. It was just paper covered in the ink of a bitter woman. Watching the cream envelope absorb the coffee stains, I realized I wasn't afraid of them anymore. They weren't powerful villains. They were just pathetic. The realization hit me like fresh air after a long confinement. For years, I viewed my parents as the gatekeepers of my self-worth. I thought their approval was the prize at the end of the race. Now I saw the race was rigged and the prize was worthless. I tied up the trash bag and carried it out to the curb. As the garbage truck rumbled down the street the next morning, taking their toxic expectations away, I felt something I hadn't felt since childhood. I was finally free. The silence in my house wasn't lonely anymore. 1 year of silence had transformed my life into something unrecognizable. I was now a senior finance manager, earning a salary that would make my father choke. I had upgraded the Audi, bought a house in a zip code they couldn't afford, and found Sarah. She was smart, kind, and completely briefed on the family war. When the wedding invitation arrived, I almost declined, but Uncle Richard insisted I had nothing to hide. So I pressed my suit, took Sarah's hand, and walked into the lion's den. The church was humid, smelling of lilies and stale perfume. We arrived just as the organ started, slipping into a pew across the aisle from the danger zone. I spotted them immediately. My father looked grayer, his suit hanging loosely on his frame. Nathan sat between them, slouching like a teenager despite being 26. He wore a dress shirt that was untucked and wrinkled. They looked like a portrait of stagnation. Beside me, Sarah squeezed my hand, a silent signal of support. We were the invaders here. The ceremony was a blur of vows and hymns, but my focus remained peripheral. I could feel my mother's gaze boring into the side of my head. She wasn't watching the bride. She was cataloging my appearance. Every time I glanced over, she was whispering urgently to my father, gesturing vaguely in my direction. Nathan just stared at his phone, hiding it behind a hymnal. They were physically present, but completely checked out. It was satisfying to see that, without me to target, they were simply miserable. The reception was held in a banquet hall draped in cheap tulle. I navigated the room with a confidence I never possessed as a child. Relatives I hadn't seen in years approached me, asking about the new job and the house. I kept my answers brief but honest, letting the truth do the heavy lifting. I saw my aunt's eyes widen when I mentioned the title, Senior Manager. The whispers started circulating, but this time, they weren't about my arrogance. They were about my undeniable ascent. About an hour in, I secured a glass of wine for Sarah from the bar. As I turned to leave, the crowd parted slightly, revealing my mother standing by a high, top table. She had been waiting for this moment of isolation. She blocked my path, clutching a glass of Chardonnay like a weapon. Her eyes were red-rimmed, likely from a pre-game crying session in the bathroom. "Can we talk?" she asked, her voice trembling with practiced fragility. The noise of the party seemed to fade into a dull buzz. I looked at her, searching for any sign of genuine remorse. There was none. She looked expectant, as if my presence alone was an admission of defeat. I told her there was nothing to talk about until she apologized. She scoffed, the fragile mask slipping instantly. She said, I couldn't avoid her, forever, because she was my mother. She claimed she had sent a letter, and I was being unreasonable. She was still trying to dictate the terms of a relationship she had incinerated with her own hands. I leaned in closer, keeping my voice low but hard as granite. I asked her specifically if she was sorry for trying to get me fired. I needed her to say the words. I needed her to acknowledge the act of sabotage. She blinked, caught off guard by my directness. Then her face flushed a blotchy red. She hissed that she made one mistake. She equated a coordinated HR attack with a spilled drink. She refused to name the sin, which meant she would definitely commit it again. Then came the justification, right on cue. She straightened her back and told me she was only trying to help me. She said I had become arrogant and someone needed to humble me. She truly believed that destroying my career was a maternal duty. The delusion was absolute. She wasn't a mother who made a mistake, she was a zealot. I realized then that she would never change. She would burn my world down every single time just to keep me in the ashes with Nathan. And there it is, I said, stepping back. You still think you were right. I told her that until that changed, we were strangers. Her mouth opened to argue, to launch another guilt trip. But I didn't stay for the encore. I turned my back on her mid-sentence. It was the rudest thing I had ever done, and it felt fantastic. I walked away without looking back, leaving her standing alone with her Chardonnay and her bitterness. The cord was finally, truly cut. I returned to Sarah and handed her the wine. From across the room, I saw my mother crying into my father's shoulder. A few years ago, that sight would have crushed me. I would have rushed to fix it, to apologize, to take the blame. Now, I just took a sip of my drink and turned to the dance floor. Her tears were no longer my problem. They were just rain on a window I had closed. I smiled at my girlfriend and let the music drown them out. The last year has blurred into a steady rhythm of peace. I sit in an office with a skyline view, the placard on my door reading Director of Finance. My salary has jumped again, reaching a number that would sound like fiction to my father. I bought a colonial in a neighborhood where the trees are older than the country. It has a guest room that will never host my parents. Sarah and I are looking at engagement rings. The life I built is solid, resting on concrete facts. Uncle Richard remains my only window into the ruins I left behind. We meet for lunch monthly at a steakhouse downtown. He delivers the news like a war correspondent reporting from a losing front. Nathan is 27 and back in his childhood bedroom. He tried moving out, but the apartment experiment failed after 6 months because roommates expect rent money. My parents welcomed him back with open arms and heavy hearts. They are a closed ecosystem of dysfunction, feeding off each other's excuses while the house slowly decays. The latest development is a podcast about societal unfairness. Nathan bought thousands of dollars of equipment with Dad's credit card. He sits in the basement recording monologues to an audience of 0. My mother tells the neighbors he is a digital entrepreneur. She still cries when she hears my name, according to Richard. It isn't because she misses me. It is because she can no longer control me. They are stuck in a time loop, replaying the same script while the world moves on. For a long time, I thought my success was purely an act of revenge. I believed every promotion was a slap in their collective face. But as I review the quarterly projections, I realize that anger has finally evaporated. I didn't climb this high to make Nathan feel small. I climbed this high to make myself safe. Money and status aren't weapons anymore, they are walls. They keep the chaos out. I am not proving them wrong. I am simply proving myself right. I used to check my phone on holidays, bracing for the inevitable ambush. Now, the silence on Christmas morning is profoundly peaceful. I don't wonder if I am too successful or too loud. I don't shrink to fit a room built for someone else. The invisible child died the day I blocked their numbers. The man who replaced him takes up space without apologizing. I look at the photo of Sarah on my desk. We are happy because we chose to be adults. I pick up my pen to sign the closing documents for a vacation property. The ink flows smoothly across the heavy paper. It is a permanent mark, just like the boundaries I drew. My phone buzzes with a text from Richard saying, "My mother asked about me again." I don't feel guilt. I don't feel anger. I delete the message and turn back to my work. My family is the woman waiting for me at home. The rest is just history I survived.